Imagine waking up tomorrow and realizing there is no future where you stand. No land, no decent work, no path forward. Then you hear a rumor. Thousands of kilometers away, another continent is desperate for workers. Would you stay, or would you leave? Today, millions dream of reaching Europe. But 2 centuries ago, Europe was the continent millions were desperate to escape. Between 1815 and 1932, roughly 65 million Europeans left their homelands. That is close to the population of modern France. It remains one of the largest voluntary migrations in human history. They crossed oceans carrying almost nothing. No fortune, no guarantee, only the stubborn hope that somewhere else life could be different. Many would never return. Their children would speak different languages. Their grandchildren would grow up under different flags, and their journey would reshape Europe, build new nations, and permanently transform the global economy. This is not simply a story about migration. It is a story about supply and demand, risk and reward, labor and opportunity. It is the story of what happens when millions of people leave places where opportunity is disappearing and move toward places where it is being created. Chapter 1. Europe was running out of opportunity. In the early 19th century, Europe looked powerful from the outside. Its empires stretched across the world. Its factories multiplied. Its cities expanded. But beneath that image of power, millions of ordinary people were struggling simply to survive. Europe's population was growing rapidly. Agricultural improvements increased food production. Medical knowledge slowly reduced mortality. More children survived into adulthood. Families became larger. But the amount of available land did not increase. And employment did not grow quickly enough to absorb everyone searching for work. Across rural Europe, farms were repeatedly divided among children. A plot that had once supported one family was split between several heirs, then split again in the next generation. Eventually, many young people inherited land too small to sustain them, or inherited nothing at all. Every village seemed to face the same problem: too many sons, too little land, too few opportunities. Industrialization promised a solution. Factories appeared across Britain, France, Germany, and other parts of Europe. Cities attracted workers from the countryside. But factory employment was often harsh and unstable. 12-hour shifts, dangerous machinery, crowded housing, wages that barely kept a family alive. Europe was not suffering because its people refused to work. Millions were willing to work extremely hard. The problem was that too many workers were competing for too few decent opportunities. Economists call this a labor surplus. For ordinary families, it felt like a closed door. And when people can no longer see a future at home, distance begins to look less frightening. Chapter 2. When hunger forced people to leave. Economic pressure alone does not explain every departure. Sometimes migration was not simply a search for a better life. It was a question of survival. In Ireland during the Great Famine, potato crops failed repeatedly during the 1840s. Hunger spread. Disease followed. Families watched their food disappear and their communities collapse. Between the famine years and the decades that followed, millions of Irish people left the island. Some boarded overcrowded vessels with everything they owned packed into wooden trunks. Others carried little more than clothes, family documents, and perhaps a religious object. At the docks, parents said goodbye to children they might never see again. Young men left villages where generations of their families had lived. Mothers boarded ships without knowing whether their children would survive the journey. For many, there was no realistic plan to return. The decision had already been made by hunger, poverty, or persecution. Ireland was one of the clearest examples, but it was not alone. Germans escaped poverty and political instability. Italians left regions where employment was scarce and wages remained desperately low. Scandinavians searched for farmland. Eastern European Jews fled persecution and violence. Poles, Russians, and other Eastern Europeans sought safety and economic opportunity. Europe was not exporting one type of migrant. It was exporting farmers, craftsmen, laborers, merchants, miners, families, and future entrepreneurs. People did not all leave for the same reason, but they were moving in the same direction, away from limits, toward possibility. Chapter 3. A world desperate for workers. While Europe struggled with too many workers chasing too few opportunities, countries across the Atlantic faced the opposite problem. They possessed vast territories, fertile soil, forests, minerals, rivers, but land and resources do not automatically create prosperity. Fields do not cultivate themselves. Railways do not build themselves. Minerals buried underground do not finance cities until someone extracts, transports, and sells them. The United States, Canada, Argentina, Brazil, Australia, and New Zealand all needed people. They needed farmers to cultivate land, laborers to build railways, workers to operate factories, miners to extract resources, craftsmen to construct homes, merchants to create businesses, teachers to educate children, taxpayers to finance governments. These countries did not simply need larger populations. They needed human capital. They needed knowledge, labor, energy, and ambition. A powerful global equation had emerged. Europe had more labor than its economies could absorb. The New World had more land and resources than its existing populations could fully develop. One side had workers, the other had opportunity. Migration connected the two. The Atlantic became one of the largest labor market bridges in history. Chapter 4. The greatest recruitment campaign of its time. European migration is often described as though millions of people spontaneously decided to leave. But migration was not only pushed by poverty, it was actively pulled by governments, employers, landowners, and shipping companies. Countries competed to attract European workers. Governments offered land. Railway companies searched for laborers. Plantation owners and industrial employers needed workers. Shipping companies promoted overseas travel through posters, agents, and newspaper advertisements. Some advertisements promised fertile land. Others promised high wages. Many presented life abroad as almost effortless. Reality was usually harder, but the message was powerful. Leave Europe, and you may have a future. Then came the letters. Migrants who had already crossed the Atlantic wrote home to relatives and neighbors. Some described better wages. Others spoke of land, work, and social mobility. Some exaggerated their success because admitting failure was too painful. But even exaggerated stories had consequences. One successful migrant could inspire a brother. One letter could influence an entire family. One family could encourage an entire village. Migration became self-reinforcing. People were more willing to travel when relatives or neighbors were already waiting for them. Steamships accelerated the process. Earlier Atlantic voyages could take many weeks under difficult conditions. Steam-powered vessels made journeys faster, more predictable, and increasingly affordable. The ocean remained dangerous, but it no longer seemed impossible to cross. For millions of ordinary Europeans, migration gradually changed from an unimaginable risk into a practical economic decision. Families sold property, borrowed money, bought tickets, and placed their future on the other side of the ocean. Chapter 5. Who left? And where did they go? The migration unfolded over more than a century. It was not a single wave, and it did not move toward only one country. The United States received the largest number of European migrants. Its expanding industries, farmland, and cities created enormous demand for labor. New York became one of the main gateways into the country. But the United States was only part of the story. Canada attracted farmers, laborers, and families seeking land. Argentina received millions of Europeans, especially Italians and Spaniards. European migration transformed Buenos Aires and influenced the country's language, culture, food, and identity. Brazil recruited Europeans to work in agriculture, industry, and expanding urban centers. Australia and New Zealand relied heavily on European settlers to grow their populations and economies. South Africa also became a destination for European migration. These movements permanently reshaped the demographic map of the world. Some migrants formed neighborhoods where their original language remained dominant. Others adapted quickly. Their children often grew up between two identities. Their grandchildren increasingly saw themselves as American, Canadian, Argentine, Brazilian, or Australian. Many migrants never saw their birthplace again. They left Europe physically, but they carried pieces of Europe with them: languages, religions, skills, recipes, political ideas, family traditions. They left Europe behind, but Europe never entirely left them. Chapter 6. They did not just find jobs, they built economies. European migrants did not simply arrive and occupy space. They became part of the productive machinery of growing economies. They laid railway tracks across continents. They cleared forests. They opened farms. They dug mines. They worked in steel mills and textile factories. They constructed ports, roads, bridges, and homes. They established shops and businesses. They founded schools, newspapers, associations, and religious institutions. They raised children who would become workers, entrepreneurs, soldiers, engineers, teachers, and political leaders. Every migrant represented more than another pair of hands. Each migrant was also a future consumer, a future taxpayer, a future parent, potentially a future business owner. Their labor produced goods and services. Their wages created demand. Their spending supported local businesses. Their taxes helped finance infrastructure. Their children expanded the future workforce. Migration did not merely add people to economies. It multiplied economic activity. A railway worker helped build transport networks. Those networks made trade cheaper. Cheaper trade allowed businesses to grow. Growing businesses hired more workers. Those workers created new demand. Migration generated chains of economic consequences extending far beyond the individual migrant. It was not charity. It was investment in human productive capacity. Countries were not simply welcoming people. They were importing future economic growth. Chapter 7. Who really benefited? The obvious answer is that migrants benefited. Many escaped hunger, unemployment, persecution, or a lifetime without land. Some achieved social mobility that would have been almost impossible in Europe. But migrants were not the only winners. Employers benefited from a larger workforce. Railway companies gained the labor needed to expand transport networks. Landowners gained tenants, farmers, and customers. Shipping companies earned money transporting millions of passengers. Governments gained taxpayers and soldiers. Cities gained workers, consumers, and entrepreneurs. Receiving countries turned migration into economic power. Their populations grew. Their internal markets expanded. Their industries gained labor. Their territories became easier to develop and control. But Europe also benefited in certain ways. When millions left, pressure on land and employment was reduced. Migrants frequently sent money back to relatives. These remittances supported families and local communities. Trade and business links developed between migrants and their countries of origin. However, the benefits were not evenly distributed. Migration involved enormous suffering. People died during dangerous journeys. Workers faced exploitation. Migrants encountered discrimination and hostility. Indigenous peoples in settler societies often lost land and political power as European populations expanded. And receiving countries did not always welcome every European equally. Race, religion, nationality, and class shaped who was accepted and who was rejected. Migration created wealth, but it also created conflict. It opened opportunities for millions while contributing to the displacement and marginalization of others. The history is powerful precisely because it cannot be reduced to a simple story of heroes and victims. There were winners, there were losers, and sometimes the same person experienced both. Chapter 8. Why Europe eventually stopped exporting people. Then the direction of migration began to change. Europe transformed. Industrial productivity increased. Factories produced more with fewer resources. Education expanded. Healthcare improved. Urban infrastructure developed. Living standards gradually rose. Workers gained political rights and stronger legal protections. Wages improved in many countries. Economic opportunity slowly caught up with population growth. Europe was no longer producing millions of people with no realistic economic future. It was creating more jobs, more security, and more opportunity at home. The continent that had exported workers began to retain them. Then, after the Second World War, Europe increasingly needed workers of its own. Industries had to be rebuilt. Populations were aging. Labor shortages appeared. European countries began recruiting migrants from North Africa, Turkey, Southern Europe, the Caribbean, and former colonies. History had changed direction. The continent people once left in search of work became a destination for people following the same economic logic. Countries that had once sent millions abroad now debated immigration within their own borders. The flags had changed. The routes had changed. The people had changed. But the underlying incentive remained the same. People move toward opportunity. They always have. They always will. Conclusion. History often remembers wars, kings, borders, treaties, but civilizations are also built by ordinary families making extraordinary decisions. Between 1815 and 1932, Europe's greatest export was not coal. It was not steel. It was not machinery. It was people. Around 65 million of them. Farmers, workers, craftsmen, mothers, fathers, children. People who crossed oceans with almost nothing because staying offered even less. They did not simply build new lives. They built farms, railways, factories, cities, and institutions. They expanded economies. They transformed cultures. They changed the demographic future of entire continents. Their story reveals a fundamental economic truth. People rarely abandon everything they know without a reason. They move when the cost of staying becomes greater than the risk of leaving. When opportunity disappears, people depart. When opportunity grows, people arrive. Migration is not only the movement of populations, it is the movement of labor, knowledge, ambition, capital, culture, and civilization itself. 2 centuries ago, Europe exported millions of people because the greatest opportunities existed elsewhere. Today, millions seek Europe for exactly the same reason. The direction changed. Human nature did not. Because the most valuable resource any nation possesses has never been its gold, its oil, its land, or even its technology. It has always been its people, and wherever opportunity moves, people will follow.